During our campaign victory celebration, an unexpected call came through on my husband's phone. As it rang on speaker, a gruff voice demanded, "The Henderson situation needs to be handled tonight. Did you transfer the money?" Without hesitation, I picked up the phone and smiled calmly. "Why don't you come to the hotel? Room 4112. I suggested. "It's the perfect time. I was just about to share some exciting news with everyone." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're a subscriber, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Tell us I found all your recordings, the bank transfers, and the photos of you in Georgia. I've already contacted Detective Lynch. The room went dead silent. I never meant to answer Seth's phone that night. 3 years of marriage to Springfield's rising political star had built a foundation of trust between us, or so I believed. The champagne bubbles caught the light from the crystal chandelier as I moved through our campaign headquarters, accepting congratulations with a practiced smile. Seth Milliken had just won the mayoral race by a landslide, and I was the perfect politician's wife, poised, supportive, and completely devoted to his success. "Anna, you must be so proud," gushed Margaret Whitmore, one of our biggest campaign donors, air-kissing both my cheeks. "Seth is going to transform this city." "We both are," I corrected gently, though the words felt hollow. Lately Seth's "we" had started feeling more like me and my agenda. The victory party was in full swing at the Grand Regency Hotel. Red, white, and blue balloons bobbed against the ceiling while local news crews captured every moment of Seth's triumph. At 34, my husband was the youngest mayor-elect in Springfield's history, and his political future seemed limitless. I watched him work the room with effortless charisma, his sandy hair perfectly styled, his campaign smile never wavering. He had that politician's gift of making every person feel like the most important one in the room. It's what had attracted me to him in the first place, that magnetic confidence that drew people into his orbit. "There's our future First Lady of the state," joked City Councilman Howard Burns, raising his glass of whiskey. "Mark my words, Anna, you'll be living in the governor's mansion within 10 years. I laughed, but something cold settled in my stomach. Seth's ambitions had grown more consuming with each electoral victory. What had started as idealistic public service had morphed into something harder, more calculating. The man who once stayed up all night crafting policy papers now spent his evenings in closed-door meetings with donors whose names I wasn't supposed to know. The first sign something was wrong came during his victory speech. As Seth gripped the podium, thanking supporters and promising a new era of prosperity for Springfield, his phone buzzed insistently in his jacket pocket. He ignored it the first time, but when it buzzed again, I saw his jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. "My fellow citizens," he continued smoothly, "together we will build a Springfield that works for everyone, not just the privileged few." The irony wasn't lost on me. Our own circles had grown increasingly exclusive over the past year. The old friends from law school had been replaced by wealthy developers and shadowy political operatives. Even our social calendar now revolved around fundraisers and strategy sessions, rather than the casual dinner parties we used to love. After the speech, as we posed for photos with local dignitaries, Seth's phone rang again. This time he stepped away from the cameras, cupping his hand over the device as he answered. "Not now," he said tersely. "We'll discuss it tomorrow." When he returned, his smile was back in place, but I caught the brief flash of irritation in his eyes. It was an expression I'd been seeing more often lately, a hardness that hadn't been there when we first met at a civil rights conference 4 years ago. "Everything okay?" I asked as we cut the victory cake together, photographers' flashes popping around us. "Just campaign logistics," he replied, his hand finding the small of my back in a gesture that should have felt intimate but somehow didn't. "Nothing that can't wait." But as the evening wore on, the calls kept coming. Each time, Seth would excuse himself, moving to increasingly isolated corners of the ballroom to take them. I began to notice a pattern. The calls always came from unknown numbers, never saved contacts, and each conversation left him slightly more agitated than the last. By 10 o'clock, the crowd had thinned considerably. The news crews had packed up their equipment, satisfied with their footage of Springfield's golden boy celebrating his victory. Close friends and family lingered, enjoying the open bar and basking in the glow of electoral success. I was chatting with Seth's campaign manager, Corey Hansen, about plans for the transition when another call came through. This time Seth's phone was sitting on the bar counter where he'd left it to grab another drink. The name on the screen simply read "Private Number." I glanced around for Seth and spotted him across the room, deep in conversation with a group of labor union representatives. The phone continued to ring, its persistent buzz cutting through the celebratory chatter. "Seth," I called out, but he was too far away to hear me over the noise. The phone rang again immediately after going to voicemail. Then again. Something about the urgency made my stomach clench. In my 3 years of marriage to a politician, I'd learned that late-night calls rarely brought good news. They meant scandals breaking, opposition research surfacing, or crises that required immediate damage control. Against my better judgment, I picked up the phone. My finger hovered over the answer button as it rang for the 4th time in 2 minutes. Seth still hadn't noticed, still engrossed in his animated discussion about municipal contracts and union support. The caller was persistent, desperate even. And in politics, desperation usually meant danger. I made a decision that would change everything. I answered the call. "Seth?" The voice was gravelly, nervous. "Male. We've got a problem. Henderson's threatening to go public unless we double the payment. And there's something else. I think someone's been following me." My blood ran cold. I said nothing, my mind racing to process what I was hearing. "Seth, are you there? We need to meet tonight. This whole thing is about to blow up in our faces." Still I remained silent, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure the caller could hear it through the phone. "Look, I know you're worried about your wife finding out, but George is getting suspicious too. She's asking questions about the money transfers. We need to clean this up before." I hung up. The phone felt heavy in my trembling hands as I stared at the black screen, the caller's words echoing in my mind. Henderson. Money transfers. Georgia. The celebratory noise of the victory party seemed to fade into a distant hum as the implications crashed over me like a cold wave. "You look pale. Are you feeling all right?" I turned to find Amelia Millay, Seth's chief of staff, studying me with concern. Her sharp eyes missed nothing. It's what made her invaluable to Seth's political machine and terrifying to his opponents. "Just tired," I managed, forcing a smile. "It's been a long campaign." But Amelia's expression remained skeptical. She'd known me for 2 years, ever since joining Seth's team, and she could read people like open books. It's why Seth trusted her with the sensitive aspects of his political operations. "Where's Seth?" she asked, glancing around the room. I followed her gaze and spotted my husband still engaged with the union representatives, his hands animated as he spoke. From a distance, he looked like the same charismatic man I'd fallen in love with, passionate about public service, committed to making a difference. But now I found myself studying him differently, searching for signs of deception I might have missed. "Still working the room," I replied, setting his phone back down on the bar counter exactly where I'd found it. "You know how he is, always the politician." Amelia nodded, but something in her expression shifted. "Anna, can I ask you something? Off the record?" My stomach tightened. "Of course. Has Seth seemed different to you lately? More stressed than usual?" The question caught me off guard. If Amelia was noticing changes in Seth's behavior, then I wasn't imagining things. Different how? I don't know exactly. More secretive, maybe. He's been taking meetings I'm not privy to, which never used to happen, and there are phone calls he insists on handling personally. She paused, lowering her voice. "Budget discussions he won't let me sit in on." Budget discussions. My mind immediately went to the caller's mention of money transfers. "Have you asked him about it?" I tried. He told me I was being paranoid, that the stress of the campaign was making me see conspiracies where none existed. Amelia's laugh was hollow. "But I've worked on 6 campaigns, Anna. I know the difference between election stress and something else." Before I could respond, Seth's voice boomed across the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention." The remaining guests turned toward him, conversations tapering off. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. He stood near the windows overlooking downtown Springfield, the city lights creating a dramatic backdrop. Even now, even with suspicion gnawing at my insides, I had to admit he commanded a room effortlessly. "I want to thank you all for being here tonight," he began, his voice carrying the practiced cadence of a born politician. "This victory isn't just mine, it belongs to every person who believed in our vision for Springfield's future." Polite applause rippled through the room. I found myself clapping mechanically, my mind still reeling from the phone call. "But most of all," Seth continued, his eyes finding mine across the room, "I want to thank the woman who stood by my side, through every late night, every difficult decision, every moment of doubt. Anna, you're not just my wife, you're my partner in everything we're going to accomplish." More applause, warmer this time. People were looking at me expectantly, waiting for the gracious smile and modest wave that political wives were supposed to provide. I delivered both, but they felt like lies on my face. Seth raised his champagne glass. "To Anna Milliken, the woman who makes everything possible." The toast echoed around the room, but the words felt like acid in my throat. If what I'd heard on that phone call was true, then I wasn't his partner at all. I was his cover story, his respectable facade, while he conducted business I knew nothing about. As the party gradually wound down over the next hour, I watched Seth more carefully than I ever had before. The easy charm was still there, but now I noticed other things: the way he checked his phone obsessively, the tension in his shoulders when certain people approached, the careful distance he maintained from specific conversations. "Ready to head home?" he asked around midnight, slipping his arm around my waist as the last guests filtered out. "Ready," I agreed, though home suddenly felt like foreign territory. The drive to our house in Maple Ridge was quiet, both of us exhausted from the long day. Seth drove with one hand, the other resting on my knee in a gesture that should have felt comfortable but somehow didn't. His phone, silent for the past hour, suddenly buzzed with a text message. I saw him glance at it quickly, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. "Work?" I asked casually. "Transition team logistics," he replied without looking at me. Nothing urgent, but I'd caught enough of the message preview to see it wasn't from anyone on his official team. The sender's name was simply G. Georgia. It had to be. At home, Seth disappeared into his study while I went through the motions of our evening routine. I removed my makeup, changed into pajamas, and tried to process what I'd learned. My husband was involved in something that required secret payments and clandestine meetings. He was working with someone named Georgia, who wasn't part of his official campaign staff. And there was a Henderson who apparently posed some kind of threat. None of it made sense with the man I thought I'd married. Seth Milliken was supposed to be the good guy, the reform candidate who'd run on a platform of transparency and accountability. His entire political brand was built on being different from the corrupt machine politicians who'd run Springfield for decades. When Seth finally came to bed an hour later, I pretended to be asleep. He slipped under the covers carefully, trying not to wake me, but I could feel the tension radiating from his body. Whatever was happening, it was keeping him awake too. "Anna," he whispered after a few minutes. I didn't respond, maintaining the illusion of sleep. "I love you," he said quietly into the darkness. "I hope you know that. Whatever happens, I love you." The words should have comforted me. Instead, they sounded like an apology for something I didn't yet understand. Or worse, they sounded like goodbye. The next morning brought the familiar ritual of post-election media coverage. I sat at our kitchen island, nursing a cup of coffee that had long gone cold, watching Seth's victory speech replay on 3 different news channels. The man on screen looked confident, presidential even, as he promised to restore integrity to Springfield's government. The irony was suffocating. Seth emerged from his study, already dressed in his signature navy suit, scrolling through his phone with the focused intensity I'd once admired. Now it felt ominous. "Channel 7 wants to do a follow-up interview this afternoon," he said without looking up. "Something about my first 100 days agenda." "That's good," I replied automatically, watching as another text message lit up his screen. He read it quickly, his expression darkening before he deleted it. "Who keeps texting you so early?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. "Transition team. Everyone wants FaceTime with the new mayor." He pocketed the phone and kissed my cheek, but the gesture felt performative. "I'll probably be late tonight. Lots of meetings to set up." After he left, I found myself standing alone in our pristine kitchen, surrounded by the remnants of last night's celebration. Campaign buttons and congratulatory flowers cluttered the counters, but instead of feeling triumphant, I felt hollow. I needed answers, but I wasn't sure where to start looking for them. My phone rang, interrupting my spiraling thoughts. The caller ID showed Hannah Lynch, my college roommate and one of Springfield's few honest detectives. "Congratulations on becoming the mayor's wife," Hannah said, her voice carrying that familiar mix of affection and skepticism. "Though I have to ask, are you prepared for what comes next?" "What do you mean, Anna? I've been a cop for 8 years. I've seen what political power does to people, even good people. Just keep your eyes open, okay?" Her words hit closer to home than she could have known. "Hannah, can I ask you something hypothetically? Shoot. If someone wanted to investigate financial irregularities in a political campaign, where would they start?" There was a long pause. "That's a very specific hypothetical question. Are we talking about Seth's campaign?" I hesitated. Hannah was my oldest friend, but she was also a police detective. If I was wrong about my suspicions, I could destroy Seth's career before it even began. If I was right, I don't know yet, I admitted. But if someone were looking, where would they look? Campaign finance reports are public record. Bank transfers, donor lists, expenditures, it's all supposed to be transparent. But the real action often happens in the gaps between official reports. Cash payments, consulting fees that don't match actual services, money that gets moved through multiple accounts to obscure its origin. My stomach nodded. And if someone were making threats, demanding payments? Anna's voice sharpened. "What exactly are you asking me?" Before I could answer, I heard Seth's key in the front door. He'd been gone less than an hour. "I have to go," I whispered, ending the call. Seth appeared in the kitchen doorway, looking surprised. "Forgot my briefing folder," he explained, but his eyes were scanning the room suspiciously. "Who were you talking to, Hannah?" "She was congratulating us on the win." He nodded, but something in his expression remained guarded. As he retrieved his folder from the counter, his phone buzzed again. This time he answered immediately. "What do you mean he's asking questions?" Seth's voice was low, but I caught the edge of panic. "No, absolutely not. We stick to the plan." He noticed me listening, and stepped into the hallway, but I could still hear fragments of the conversation. "Henderson doesn't understand the position he's putting us in.
Oh.
Tell Georgia to keep her mouth shut until, if this comes out now, we're all finished." When he returned, his face was composed again, but I'd seen the mask slip. The man I'd just overheard wasn't the principled public servant who'd campaigned on transparency. He was someone I didn't recognize. "Crisis at the transition office," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You know how it is." But I didn't know. That was becoming increasingly clear. After he left again, I spent the morning researching everything I could find about Seth's campaign finances online. The official report showed nothing unusual: donations from local businesses, union endorsements, small dollar contributions from individual supporters. Everything appeared legitimate on the surface. But Hannah's words echoed in my mind. The real action happens in the gaps. I decided to start with what I knew. The caller had mentioned Henderson and Georgia. A search for Henderson Springfield yielded dozens of results, but one caught my attention: Marcus Henderson, a local developer who'd been involved in several controversial projects over the past few years. His company, Henderson Development, had faced multiple investigations for bid rigging and zoning violations, though no charges had ever been filed. Georgia was harder to track down without a last name, but I remembered Seth mentioning a Georgia Millay who'd worked on ballot access issues during the campaign. I'd never met her, despite being involved in most campaign activities. That seemed odd now. My phone buzzed with a text from Seth. Lunch meeting ran long. Won't be home until after 8. Love you. It was barely noon. I made a decision that felt both necessary and terrifying. I drove to Seth's campaign headquarters, now serving as his transition office. If Georgia Millay was real, someone there would know her. The office buzzed with activity as staffers prepared for the handover of power. I recognized most faces, but when I asked about Georgia Millay, I got blank stares. Georgia who? Asked David Kim, Seth's communications director. I don't think we had anyone by that name on the team. But Corey Hansen, Seth's campaign manager, looked uncomfortable when I mentioned the name. Can we talk privately? He asked, leading me to an empty conference room. What do you know about Georgia Millay? I asked directly. Corey closed the door and sat heavily in one of the chairs. Anna, there are some aspects of campaigns that candidates' spouses don't usually need to know about. What kind of aspects? The kind that keep good people electable in a corrupt system. My blood chilled. What does that mean, exactly? Corey looked at me for a long moment, as if weighing how much truth I could handle. It means sometimes you have to work with people you'd rather not work with. Sometimes you have to make compromises that don't look good in newspaper headlines. And Georgia Millay is one of those compromises. Georgia Millay doesn't exist, he said quietly, at least not officially. But the work she does, it's necessary work, Anna. The kind that keeps reformers like Seth competitive against machine politicians who don't play by the rules. I felt like I was drowning. What kind of work? But Corey was already standing up, his face closing off. I think you should talk to your husband about this. It's not my place to explain campaign strategy to you. As I drove home, my mind raced with possibilities, each one worse than the last. Seth was involved with people who didn't officially exist. He was making payments to someone named Henderson, and according to Corey, it was all necessary to keep him competitive. The man I'd married had built his career on opposing exactly this kind of politics. Now I was beginning to suspect he'd become everything he'd once claimed to fight against. That evening, Seth returned home exactly as he'd promised, after 8 o'clock, carrying takeout from Romano's, our favorite Italian restaurant. The gesture should have felt thoughtful, but now everything felt calculated, as if he were following a script for how to be a normal husband. Sorry about today, he said, unpacking containers of pasta and breadsticks. Transition meetings are more complicated than I expected. I watched him move around our kitchen with practiced ease, the same man who'd made me dinner on our first date 4 years ago. But that man had spent the evening talking about campaign finance reform and government transparency. This man deleted text messages and took mysterious phone calls. How was your day? He asked, settling across from me at our dining table. Quiet. I stopped by the transition office to see if anyone needed help with organizing. His fork paused halfway to his mouth. And I met some interesting people, asked about Georgia Millay. Seth set down his fork carefully. Who? The casual tone didn't match the tension I could see in his shoulders. Corey seemed to know who I was talking about. Said she does work that keeps reformers competitive. Corey says a lot of things. Seth's voice remained level, but he wasn't eating anymore. You know how campaign managers are, they see conspiracy and strategy in everything. So you don't know anyone named Georgia Millay. Should I? It wasn't a denial, it was a deflection disguised as a question, and we both knew it. The silence stretched between us, filled with all the things we weren't saying. I'm tired, I said finally, standing to clear my barely touched plate. I think I'll turn in early, Anna. His voice stopped me at the kitchen doorway. Is everything okay between us? I turned to look at him, really look at him. Seth Milliken, the man I'd fallen in love with, the man I'd married, the man who just lied to my face about something that was clearly important enough to make his campaign manager nervous. I don't know, I said honestly. Is it? That night, I lay awake listening to Seth's breathing, waiting for him to fall into deep sleep. Around midnight, his phone buzzed on the nightstand. I felt him tense beside me, but he didn't reach for it. The phone buzzed again, then again. Finally, Seth slipped quietly out of bed and padded into the hallway. I heard the soft murmur of his voice through the door, too low to make out words, but urgent enough to confirm my worst suspicions. When he returned 20 minutes later, I pretended to be asleep. But my mind was wide awake, processing what I'd learned, and making a decision that would change everything. I was going to find out what my husband was hiding, even if it destroyed us. The next morning, Seth left early for what he called budget meetings with department heads. I waited until his car disappeared around the corner, then made my first real move toward the truth. I started with our home computer, the desktop in Seth's study, that we'd always shared openly. Seth wasn't particularly tech-savvy, and he'd never hidden his passwords from me. Why would he? We trusted each other completely, or so I'd thought. His email yielded nothing suspicious, at least, nothing in his main account. But I noticed he had a secondary Gmail account I'd never seen before, one with an address that was just a random string of numbers. When I tried to access it, I found he'd changed the password. The browser history had been cleared, but I remembered Hannah mentioning once that deleted browser history could sometimes be recovered. I made a mental note to ask her about that later. Next, I turned to our financial records. Seth handled most of our banking, claiming he enjoyed the organization of it, but I had access to all our accounts. Our joint checking showed normal activity, mortgage payments, groceries, utilities, nothing suspicious. But there was a savings account I rarely looked at, one Seth had set up for campaign expenses and political activities. When I logged in, my stomach dropped. The account showed regular transfers over the past 6 months, large transfers. Money going out to something called MH Consulting Services, and coming in from Strategic Development LLC. Neither name meant anything to me, but the amounts were staggering, thousands of dollars moving in and out with no clear pattern. I took screenshots of everything, my hands shaking as I realized how much money we were talking about. Where was it coming from? Where was it going? And why had Seth never mentioned these transactions? My phone rang, startling me. The caller ID showed an unknown number. For a moment I considered letting it go to voicemail. But something made me answer. Mrs. Milliken. The voice was gravelly, nervous, the same voice I'd heard 2 nights ago at the victory party. My blood turned to ice. Who is this? We need to talk about your husband. About what he's been doing with our money. I don't know what you're talking about. I think you do, or you're about to. Meet me at Riverside Park, by the old carousel. 1 hour. Come alone. The line went dead. I stared at the phone, my mind racing. This was the caller from the victory party, the one who'd mentioned Henderson and Georgia, and money transfers. He wanted to meet me, which meant he either thought I already knew about Seth's activities, or he was planning to tell me. Every instinct screamed that meeting a stranger in a park was dangerous. But every instinct had also told me that Seth was a good man, and look how that was turning out. I grabbed my purse and car keys, pausing only to send Hannah a text. If something happens to me, check Seth's political accounts. MH Consulting and Strategic Development LLC. Then I drove to Riverside Park, my hands gripping the steering wheel, as I prepared to learn truths I wasn't sure I wanted to know. The carousel sat silent in the afternoon sunshine, its painted horses frozen mid-gallop. I'd brought my children here someday, the children Seth and I had planned to have once his political career was more established. Now I wondered if those dreams were as illusory as everything else about our marriage. A man approached from the direction of the parking lot, middle-aged with thinning hair and nervous eyes. He kept glancing around, as if expecting to be followed. "Mrs. Milliken?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. "My name is Marcus Henderson, and I think it's time you learned what your husband has really been doing with my money." Marcus Henderson looked like a man who hadn't slept in weeks. His rumpled suit hung loose on his frame, and deep circles shadowed his eyes. He kept checking over his shoulder as we sat on a weathered park bench, the silent carousel casting long shadows in the afternoon sun. "Your husband came to me 8 months ago," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "Said he needed financial backing for his campaign, but the official channels weren't enough. He promised that once he was mayor, certain zoning restrictions would be reconsidered." My stomach clenched. "What kind of restrictions?" "The Riverside Development Project, 30 acres of prime real estate that's been tied up in environmental red tape for 3 years. Seth said he could expedite the approval process in exchange for campaign contributions." "That's illegal." Henderson's laugh was bitter. "Tell me something I don't know." But when you're facing bankruptcy and a politician offers you a lifeline, you don't ask too many questions about the ethics. I thought about the bank transfers I'd seen that morning, MH Consulting Services. How much money are we talking about? $200,000 over 6 months, funneled through shell companies to avoid campaign finance laws. He pulled out his phone and showed me a series of text messages. But now Seth's asking for more, and his intermediary is getting dangerous. The messages were from an unknown number, but the language was unmistakable: pay the additional $50,000 by Friday or face the consequences. The environmental permits are just the beginning of what we can do for you. Who's the intermediary? Someone who calls herself Georgia. Never met her face to face, but she handles all the logistics. Bank transfers, meeting schedules, keeping track of who owes what to whom. Henderson's hands trembled as he pocketed his phone. "She knows things about my business, my family, my finances that no campaign consultant should know." Georgia Millay, the woman who didn't officially exist but somehow knew enough to threaten people. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because I'm scared," Henderson admitted. "This isn't just campaign finance violations anymore. Yesterday someone broke into my office. Nothing was stolen, but files were moved, computers were accessed. And this morning my daughter got a call at college. Someone warning her to tell her father to be more cooperative." The implications hit me like a physical blow. Seth wasn't just taking illegal campaign contributions. He was involved with people who threatened families. "What do you want from me?" Henderson leaned closer, desperation in his voice. "I want out, but every time I try to cut contact, the demands get worse. They're not just asking for money anymore. They want information about other developers, other city contracts, other politicians who might be willing to play ball. You're talking about blackmail. I'm talking about a criminal enterprise, and your husband is at the center of it. Henderson stood abruptly, scanning the park again. I've already stayed too long. They'll know I'm missing from the office. He pressed a business card into my hand. If you want to know more, there's someone else you should talk to. Someone who used to work with Georgia before things got too dangerous. The card was simple: Simon Lynch, private investigator. An address on the other side of town. Simon. I stared at the name. Is he related to Hannah Lynch? You know Hannah. Henderson looked surprised. Simon's her brother. He's been investigating Seth's operation for weeks, but he needs someone with inside access to get the evidence he needs. My head was spinning. Hannah's brother was investigating my husband. Mrs. Milliken, I know this is a lot to process, but if we don't stop this soon, more people are going to get hurt, and when this all comes out, and it will come out, you don't want to be seen as complicit. After Henderson left, I sat alone by the carousel, trying to process what I'd learned. Seth wasn't just having an affair with Georgia, he was running a criminal operation with her. They were extorting money from developers, threatening families, and using his position as mayor-elect to enrich themselves. The man I'd married was gone, replaced by someone who ordered break-ins and intimidated college students. I drove to Simon Lynch's office in a daze, the business card clutched in my sweaty palm. The address led me to a modest building in Springfield's Work District, far from the polished political circles Seth and I usually moved in. Simon Lynch looked like a weathered version of his sister Hannah, same sharp eyes, same no-nonsense demeanor, but aged by years of seeing the worst in people. Anna Milliken, he said before I could introduce myself. I wondered when you'd show up. His office was sparse but organized, filing cabinets, a computer and walls covered with photographs and documents connected by red string like something from a crime show. Henderson said you've been investigating my husband. For 3 weeks now. Hannah asked me to look into some irregularities she'd noticed in campaign finance reports. What we found goes way beyond election fraud. He gestured to the wall display, and I felt my knees go weak. Photos of Seth meeting with various men in parking lots and restaurants. Bank records showing the same transfers I'd discovered that morning. And in the center of it all, a photograph of a woman I'd never seen before. Tall, blonde, professionally dressed, standing next to Seth outside a downtown hotel. Georgia Millay, Simon said, following my gaze. Real name Georgia Hanson. Former campaign consultant turned professional fixer. She specializes in helping politicians navigate the gray areas between legal and illegal fundraising. Gray areas: extortion, money laundering, witness intimidation, all with plausible deniability built in. Simon pulled out a thick folder. Anna, your husband isn't just taking bribes. He's franchising corruption, teaching other politicians how to set up the same system in their districts. I sank into a chair, overwhelmed by the scope of what I was learning. The question is, Simon continued, what are you prepared to do about it? Simon Lynch's evidence wall looked like something from a federal investigation. Red strings connected photographs, bank statements, and phone records in a web of corruption that made my head spin. At the center of it all was my husband's campaign photo, smiling that familiar confident smile that now seemed sinister. How long has this been going on? I asked, studying a timeline that stretched back over a year. We think the operation started small, just Seth and Georgia working together on legitimate campaign consulting. But once they realized how much money they could make bending the rules, things escalated quickly. Simon pulled out a series of financial documents. Look at this pattern. Every month, Money flows from developers like Henderson into shell companies. Those companies then make legal campaign contributions to Seth's war chest. Meanwhile, Seth uses his influence to expedite permits and zoning changes. But he's not even mayor yet. No, but everyone knows he will be. And his current position on the city council gave him enough influence to make promises. Simon pointed to another section of the wall. The problem is, Georgia got greedy. Instead of keeping things simple, she started expanding the operation. He showed me photographs of 3 other men I didn't recognize. Meet the city's newest co-conspirators. 2 council members and a county commissioner, all recruited by Georgia in the past 6 months. She's building a network. My mouth went dry. A network of what? Corrupt politicians who can influence everything from construction permits to tax assessments. It's not just about Seth anymore, Anna. Your husband has become the face of a citywide criminal enterprise. Simon opened another folder, revealing hotel receipts and restaurant bills. And yes, he and Georgia are having an affair. But that's almost secondary to the money laundering and extortion. I recognized some of the locations from Seth's supposed transition meetings over the past few weeks. The Grand Regency Hotel where we'd held the victory party. Romano's restaurant where he'd bought our dinner last night. Places that should have held innocent memories were now evidence of betrayal. What kind of evidence do you have? Photos, financial records, recorded conversations, though those were obtained through Henderson's cooperation. So their legal admissibility is questionable. Simon's expression grew serious. What we need is someone with legitimate access to Seth's private communications. Someone who can document the conspiracy from the inside. The implication was clear. He wanted me to spy on my own husband. I can't do that, I said automatically. Anna, I understand this is difficult. But Henderson isn't the only person they've threatened. We've identified at least 6 other business owners who've been coerced into participating. And the threats are escalating. He showed me police reports, break-ins, vandalism, anonymous threatening calls, all targeting people who'd had dealings with Seth's organization. Last week, someone slashed the tires of a restaurant owner who refused to make a campaign contribution. His 8-year-old daughter was in the car when it happened. I felt sick. Seth wouldn't hurt a child. Maybe not directly. But Georgia Hanson has a history of intimidation tactics that cross every line. Simon pulled out a background report. She was investigated in Chicago for similar activities before moving to Springfield. 3 witnesses in that case received death threats. One had his house firebombed. The room felt like it was closing in around me. What exactly are you asking me to do? Document everything. Take photos of Seth's private communications. Record conversations when possible. Gather evidence of the financial transfers. We need proof that links Seth directly to the threats and extortion, not just the campaign finance violations. He handed me a small device that looked like a USB drive. This will copy everything on his computer without leaving a trace. And this he gave me what appeared to be a normal smartphone case. Has recording capabilities that activate with voice commands. I stared at the surveillance equipment, my hands shaking. 3 days ago, I'd been planning Seth's inaugural celebration. Now I was being asked to help build a criminal case against him. There's something else, Simon said quietly. Hannah doesn't know I'm working this case. She's been kept out of it because of your friendship. But if this goes to trial, she'll likely be called as a witness. The financial irregularities she noticed are part of the official investigation now. Official investigation. The FBI opened a preliminary inquiry last week based on our findings. They're moving slowly because they want to build an airtight case. But Anna, this is happening whether you help or not. The only question is whether you're viewed as a victim or an accomplice. The word accomplice hit me like a slap. I didn't know about any of this. I believe you. But you joint your names are on some of the bank accounts Georgia used for money transfers. Your signature is on documents related to campaign expenses that funded the operation. Legally, you could be charged as a conspirator. I thought about the savings account I'd discovered that morning. The one Seth had claimed was for political activities. Had I unknowingly authorized criminal transactions? If I help you, I said slowly. What happens to Seth? Simon's expression softened slightly. That depends on how cooperative he is when we present the evidence. If he agrees to testify against the larger network, he might avoid the worst charges. If he doesn't, he gestured to the evidence wall. Anna, your husband is facing federal charges for conspiracy, money laundering, extortion, and wire fraud. With Georgia's history of violence, they might add racketeering charges. We're talking about decades in prison. I stared at Seth's photograph, trying to reconcile the man I'd married with the criminal Simon was describing. How did I not see this? Because he didn't want you to see it. The best con artists are the ones who can compartmentalize their lives completely. Simon leaned forward. But Anna, you're seeing it now. The question is, what are you going to do about it? I drove home from Simon's office in a fog, the surveillance equipment hidden in my purse like contraband. The USB drive felt heavier than it should have, weighted with the magnitude of what I was considering. Spying on Seth wouldn't just end our marriage, it would end his life as he knew it. But the alternative was allowing him to continue threatening innocent families. The house felt different when I walked through the front door. The family photos lining the hallway, the wedding portrait above the fireplace, the campaign memorabilia, still scattered around from the victory party. All of it looked like evidence of a life that had been built on lies. I found myself standing in Seth's study, staring at the computer that held the answers to questions I wasn't sure I wanted answered. The USB drive in my hand could unlock everything: financial records, communications with Georgia, evidence of the threats against Henderson and others. My phone buzzed with a text from Seth. Running late again. Don't wait up. Love you. Love. The word felt hollow now, drained of meaning by everything I'd learned in the past 3 days. I made a decision that surprised me with its clarity. I wasn't going to act impulsively. If I was going to destroy my husband, I was going to do it methodically, carefully, with full knowledge of the consequences. I called Hannah. Can you meet me somewhere private? I asked without preamble. I need to tell you something about Seth, and I need your advice. We met at Murphy's Diner, a 24-hour place on the outskirts of town, where no one from our usual social circles would think to look. Hannah arrived still in her police uniform, having come straight from her shift. You look terrible, she said, sliding into the booth across from me. I've had better weeks. I waited until the waitress had poured our coffee and moved away before continuing. Hannah, what would you do if you discovered someone you loved was involved in criminal activities? That's a hell of a hypothetical question. Hannah studied my face carefully. Are we talking about Seth? I nodded, not trusting my voice. What kind of criminal activities? For the next 20 minutes, I laid out everything I'd learned: the mysterious phone calls, the financial irregularities, my meeting with Henderson, and Simon's investigation. Hannah listened without interrupting, her expression growing darker with each revelation. Jesus, Anna, she said finally. You're talking about a major corruption case. I know. Simon wants me to help gather evidence from inside the house. But Hannah, if I do this, I'm not just betraying my husband, I'm destroying him. Hannah leaned back against the vinyl booth, processing what I'd told her. Can I ask you something? When you look at Seth now, do you see the man you married, or do you see someone you don't recognize? The question hit me like a physical blow because I already knew the answer. I don't recognize him anymore. The Seth I married would never threaten an 8-year-old girl to pressure her father. Then the man you married is already gone, Anna. The question is whether you're going to help the man who replaced him continue hurting people. I stared into my coffee cup, watching steam rise from the dark surface. What if I'm wrong about him? What if there's an explanation for all of this that I'm missing? Then gathering evidence will prove his innocence. Hannah reached across the table and took my hand. But Anna, you and I both know that's not what you're going to find. She was right, and we both knew it. The phone calls, the bank transfers, the threats, they painted a picture too consistent to be coincidental. If I do this, I said slowly, I need to be smart about it. I can't just copy his files and hope for the best. I need a plan. Hannah nodded. First rule of any investigation: document everything. Every conversation, every suspicious action, every piece of evidence you find. Create a timeline that prosecutors can follow. What about my own legal exposure? Simon said my name is on some of the accounts. That's why you need to cooperate fully once you start. Innocent spouses who help investigators are treated very differently from those who obstruct justice. Hannah's cop instincts were kicking in. Do you have somewhere safe to stay when this all comes out? Because Anna, once Seth realizes what you're doing, your marriage is over whether he's guilty or innocent. I hadn't thought that far ahead, but she was right. The moment I copied those files, I was choosing a side in a war I'd never wanted to fight. My sister Amelia lives in Chicago, I said. She's always said I could stay with her if I needed to. Good. What about assets? You need to protect yourself financially before this explodes. We spent the next hour planning like generals preparing for battle. Hannah helped me identify which evidence would be most valuable, how to document my findings without alerting Seth, and what steps to take to protect myself legally and financially. One more thing, Hannah said as we prepared to leave. Once you start down this path, you can't change your mind halfway through. If Seth is as dangerous as the evidence suggests, hesitation could put you at risk. You think he'd hurt me? I think desperate people do desperate things. And Anna, if even half of what you've told me is true, Seth is about to become very desperate indeed. As I drove home to the house I shared with a man I no longer knew, Hannah's words echoed in my mind. I was about to cross a line that would change everything, not just for Seth but for me. Tomorrow I would start gathering the evidence that would either save innocent people from a criminal conspiracy, or destroy the life I'd spent 3 years building. Either way, there would be no going back. The next morning, I woke up with the grim determination of someone preparing for surgery, necessary, but guaranteed to leave scars. Seth had already left for what he called budget meetings, kissing my forehead with the same casual affection that had once made me feel loved. Now it felt like a betrayal of its own kind. I waited 30 minutes after his departure before retrieving the surveillance equipment Simon had given me. The USB drive looked innocuous enough, but my hands trembled as I approached Seth's computer. The desktop booted up normally, displaying the same background photo we'd used for years, our wedding picture from Napa Valley. We looked so young, so hopeful. I wondered if Seth remembered that version of himself, or if ambition had erased those simpler dreams entirely. His email program opened automatically, and I felt like I was violating something sacred even though I was doing it to protect innocent people. The inbox showed the usual mixture of political correspondence and personal messages, but I noticed several emails from addresses I didn't recognize, cryptic subject lines like schedule update and delivery confirmation. I plugged in Simon's USB drive and watched as it automatically began copying files. According to Simon, The process would take about 20 minutes and leave no trace on the computer. 20 minutes to potentially gather evidence of federal crimes committed by the man I'd promised to love and honor. While the files transferred, I explored Seth's desk more thoroughly than I ever had before. The drawers I'd once respected as his private workspace now seemed like potential evidence lockers. In the bottom drawer, beneath folders of old tax returns, I found a second cell phone I'd never seen before. The phone was password protected, but I knew Seth well enough to guess. He'd used the same 4-digit code for everything since college, 0517, our wedding anniversary. The phone unlocked on my first try. What I found made my stomach clench. Text message threads with numbers I didn't recognize, but the content was unmistakable. Instructions for delivering packages, references to handling problems, and payments of thousands of dollars for services that weren't specified. One thread mentioned Henderson by name. H is getting nervous, might need stronger encouragement. I took screenshots of everything, my hands steady despite the nausea building in my throat. This wasn't campaign consulting, or even simple bribery. This was organized criminal activity, and my husband was coordinating it. The worst revelation came in a thread with someone labeled simply as G. The Riverside Project is just the beginning. Once we control the zoning board, we can expand to county contracts. By next year, we should be able to franchise the model to other cities. Georgia wasn't just Seth's mistress, or even his co-conspirator, she was his business partner in building a corruption network that could span multiple jurisdictions. Another message made my blood run cold. I talked to a PI yesterday. Might be a problem. How do you want to handle? Anna. They knew I'd been asking questions, which meant they'd been watching me. The paranoia I'd been fighting suddenly felt like justified caution. I photographed every relevant message, then carefully returned the phone to its hiding place. The USB drive finished copying just as I heard a car in the driveway. Seth was home early. I barely had time to close his computer and pocket the drive before he walked through the front door, looking agitated in a way I'd never seen before. Anna, where are you? Kitchen, I called, forcing normalcy into my voice while my heart hammered against my ribs. He appeared in the doorway, his usually perfect hair disheveled, and his tie loosened. We need to talk, the words every spouse dreads, but in this context, they carried additional menace. Did he know what I'd been doing? Had someone seen me at the park with Henderson? About what? I asked, busying myself with loading the dishwasher. About some rumors that have been going around. Questions about campaign finances, suggestions that I might be involved in inappropriate activities. I kept my expression neutral, though inside I was screaming. What kind of rumors? Seth moved closer, studying my face with the intensity he usually reserved for political opponents. The kind that could destroy everything we've worked for. Anna, I need you to know that whatever you might hear in the coming weeks, whatever accusations people might make, I need you to stand by me. Of course, I said, automatically, but the words felt like ash in my mouth. No, I need you to really understand this. His hands gripped my shoulders with surprising force. There are people who want to see me fail, who will use any weapon they can find. They might even try to turn you against me. The irony was staggering. Seth was warning me about people trying to manipulate me, while he'd been lying to me for months about criminal activities that could land us both in federal prison. Has someone approached you? He pressed. Anyone asking questions about me, about our finances, about people I work with? This was my moment of truth. I could confess everything, tell him about Henderson, about Simon's investigation, about what I'd discovered on his secret phone. Maybe there was still a chance for honesty between us. But then I remembered the text message about stronger encouragement for Henderson, and the casual discussion of expanding their criminal network to other cities. No, I lied smoothly, no one's approached me about anything. Seth's grip on my shoulders relaxed slightly. Good, that's good. But Anna, if anyone does contact you, anyone at all, I need you to tell me immediately. Can you promise me that? I looked into the eyes of the man I'd married, searching for some remnant of the person I'd fallen in love with. But all I saw was calculation, and barely controlled desperation. I promise, I said, adding another lie to the foundation of deception our marriage had become. That night, after Seth fell asleep, I transferred all the copied files and photographs to a secure cloud account Simon had set up for me. Every document, every text message, every piece of evidence that would eventually destroy the life we'd built together. As I uploaded the files, I realized I was no longer investigating my husband's crimes. I was building the case that would put him in prison. Over the next week, I fell into a routine that felt like living in a spy thriller. By day, I played the role of supportive political wife, attending transition meetings, smiling for photographers, discussing Seth's inaugural plans with reporters. By night, I systematically documented evidence of his criminal enterprise. The breakthrough came when I discovered Seth's real office wasn't at the official transition headquarters downtown. It was a rented storage unit on the industrial side of Springfield, registered under one of the shell companies I'd found in his financial records. I followed him there on a Thursday afternoon, parking 3 blocks away, and walking through the warehouse district, with a telephoto camera Simon had given me. The storage facility looked abandoned from the outside, but several expensive cars were parked in the lot, including a black Mercedes I recognized from the victory party. Through the camera lens, I watched Seth unlock Unit 47B. Inside, I could see filing cabinets, a conference table, and what appeared to be sophisticated communication equipment. This wasn't campaign storage, it was a command center. 20 minutes later, 3 men joined Seth in the unit. I recognized one as Marcus Henderson, looking even more haggard than he had at our park meeting. The others were strangers, but their body language suggested they weren't there by choice. I couldn't hear the conversation, but I could see enough to understand the dynamics. Seth stood while the others sat. He gestured emphatically, while they nodded with the defeated posture of people who'd run out of options. When one man, middle-aged with graying hair, tried to stand and leave, Seth blocked the doorway. The meeting lasted 45 minutes. When it ended, Henderson was the last to leave, and I watched him hand Seth a manila envelope that was obviously thick with cash. I photographed everything, including the license plates of all the vehicles. Later, using Simon's contacts, I would learn that the gray-haired man was David Thornton, owner of Thornton Construction, a company that had recently won 3 major city contracts despite not being the lowest bidder. That evening, Seth returned home in an unusually good mood. He brought flowers and a bottle of expensive wine, suggesting we celebrate his successful budget meetings. "The transition is going better than expected," he said, uncorking the wine with flourish. "I think we're going to be able to implement our reform agenda faster than anyone anticipated." Reform agenda. The phrase made me sick, knowing what I'd witnessed that afternoon. "That's wonderful," I managed, accepting a glass of wine I had no intention of drinking. "What kind of reforms?" "Streamlining the permit process, reducing bureaucratic delays for development projects, making Springfield more business-friendly." Each word was technically true, but loaded with sinister double meaning. "We're going to show other cities how government can work efficiently." Efficiently. Like the criminal network Georgia had mentioned expanding to other jurisdictions. My phone buzzed with a text message. Seth glanced at it automatically, a habit that had once seemed endearing but now felt invasive. "Hannah?" he asked, reading the sender's name. Just checking in about weekend plans. I lied. The message actually contained an address and time for my next meeting with Simon. You and Hannah have been talking a lot lately, Seth observed, his tone casual but his eyes sharp. She's been supportive during the transition. It's nice to have friends who understand political life. Seth nodded, but something in his expression suggested he was filing this information away for later consideration. The next morning brought an unexpected development. I was organizing Seth's home office, a task that now served as cover for evidence gathering, when I found a folder labeled Insurance Policies, tucked behind his filing cabinet. Inside were documents I'd never seen before. A life insurance policy on me worth $2 million, taken out 6 months ago. Health insurance forms showing I'd been classified as having a pre-existing heart condition, despite never having heart problems. And most chilling of all, a copy of what appeared to be my will, with a signature I didn't remember making. My hands shook as I photographed each document. The implications were terrifying. If something happened to me, Seth would receive a massive insurance payout. The fake heart condition would provide cover for a sudden death. And the will, how had he obtained my signature on a document I'd never seen? I called Simon immediately, using the encrypted phone he'd given me for emergencies. "Can you meet me now?" I asked without preamble. I found something that suggests I might be in immediate danger. We met at a coffee shop in the next county, far from Springfield's political circles. Simon's face darkened as I showed him the insurance documents. "Anna, this changes everything," he said grimly. "We're not just talking about corruption anymore. These documents suggest premeditation for murder." The word murder hit me like a physical blow. But why? I don't know anything that could hurt him, or at least, I didn't until this week. You're his wife. If this criminal network collapses, you could be called to testify against him. Spousal privilege has limits, especially in cases involving ongoing crimes. Simon studied the fake will more closely. Plus $2 million would fund a lot of expansion into other cities. What do I do? First, we need to get you somewhere safe. Tonight. Second, we accelerate the timeline for gathering evidence. If Seth is planning something, we can't afford to wait for the perfect case. Simon pulled out a small device I hadn't seen before. This is a GPS tracker with a panic button. Wear it at all times. If you're in immediate danger, press the red button and my team will know your location instantly. Your team, the FBI agents who've been monitoring this case. Anna, we've been building a federal investigation for weeks. What you've provided has been crucial, but these insurance documents give us probable cause for immediate intervention. I stared at the tracking device, realizing my marriage wasn't just over, it had become a matter of life and death. When will you arrest him? Soon. But first, we need one more piece of evidence. Proof that connects Seth directly to the threats and violence, not just the financial crimes. Simon leaned forward intently. Anna, I need you to record a conversation with him. Get him to admit to the intimidation tactics, the threats against families like Henderson's. With that recording and the evidence you've already gathered, we'll have everything we need. And if he realizes what I'm doing, Simon's expression was grim. Then you press that panic button and pray we can reach you in time. The FBI field office in downtown Springfield looked nothing like the imposing federal buildings I'd seen in movies. It occupied 3 floors of a nondescript office complex, with government-issued furniture and fluorescent lighting that made everyone look slightly ill. Special Agent Rebecca Torres greeted me with the kind of professional warmth that suggested she'd handled dozens of cases like mine. Mid-40s, with sharp eyes and graying hair pulled back in a practical bun, she radiated competence in a way that made me feel simultaneously safer and more terrified about what I'd gotten myself into. Mrs. Milliken, I want to thank you for your cooperation in this investigation, she said, leading me to a conference room where Simon was already waiting with another agent I didn't recognize. What you've provided has been invaluable in helping us understand the scope of this operation. The table was covered with printouts of the evidence I'd gathered, bank records, text messages, photographs from the storage unit meeting. Seeing it all laid out like that, organized and categorized by federal investigators, made the criminal enterprise seem both more real and more surreal. Before we proceed, Agent Torres continued. I need to make sure you understand your legal position. Based on the evidence, we don't believe you were aware of your husband's criminal activities until recently. However, your name appears on several financial documents related to the money laundering operation. My stomach dropped. What does that mean for me? It means you have two choices. You can continue cooperating with our investigation, in which case we'll recommend immunity from prosecution in exchange for your testimony. Or you can cease cooperation, in which case you may face charges as a potential co-conspirator. The room felt like it was spinning. That's not really a choice. No, it's not, Agent Torres agreed. But I want you to understand that once you commit to testifying, there's no going back. Your marriage is over, your husband will likely spend decades in federal prison, and you'll need to enter witness protection until we've dismantled the entire network. Witness protection. The phrase hit me like a physical blow. How big is this network? The other agent, who introduced himself as Agent Martinez, opened a laptop and showed me a diagram that looked like a criminal organization chart. Based on your husband's communications and financial records, we've identified corruption networks in 4 cities, with discussions about expanding to 6 more. We're talking about dozens of politicians, hundreds of business owners who've been coerced into participation, and millions of dollars in fraudulent contracts. Seth's face was at the center of the diagram, with lines connecting him to politicians I recognized from news coverage and business leaders I'd met at social events. The scope was staggering. Your husband isn't just running a local corruption scheme, Agent Torres explained. He's franchising a model for systematic municipal corruption that could spread across the entire region. That's why this case is such a priority for the Bureau. I studied the diagram trying to process the magnitude of what Seth had built. What about Georgia Hansen? Where does she fit in? Miss Hansen is what we call a corruption consultant, Agent Martinez said, pulling up her photograph on the laptop. She specializes in helping politicians monetize their positions while maintaining plausible deniability. We believe she's the architect of the entire system. The photo showed a woman more polished than I'd expected, professional attire, carefully styled blonde hair, the kind of person who could walk into any boardroom and command respect. She looked like someone I might have befriended under different circumstances. She's also extremely dangerous, Agent Torres added. We've linked her to 3 suspicious deaths in Chicago, witnesses who were prepared to testify against politicians in her network. The deaths were ruled accidental, but the pattern is concerning. My blood chilled. Do you think Seth knows about the deaths? We don't know. But Mrs. Milliken, the insurance policies he took out on your life, combined with the forged medical records, suggest that someone in their organization views you as a potential threat. Agent Torres leaned forward. That's why we need to accelerate this investigation. We can't wait for the perfect case if there's a risk to your safety. She placed a recording device on the table, smaller and more sophisticated than the one Simon had given me. We need you to get your husband to admit to the threats against business owners, particularly the intimidation tactics used against families. With that recording, combined with the financial evidence, we'll have enough to arrest the entire network. What if he realizes what I'm doing? We'll have agents positioned nearby, Agent Martinez assured me. And you'll be wearing a GPS tracker with real-time monitoring. If anything goes wrong, we can be to your location in under 3 minutes. What happens after the arrest? Agent Torres exchanged glances with her partner. Honestly, your life as you know it ends. New identity, new location, new career. The people Seth and Georgia were working with won't just disappear when they're arrested. Some of them have resources and connections that extend far beyond Springfield. I stared at the recording device, understanding that picking it up would mean crossing a line I could never uncross. Everything I'd built, my marriage, my career, my relationships, my entire identity, would be sacrificed to stop a criminal network that threatened innocent families. There's one more thing, Agent Torres said quietly. We intercepted communications suggesting that Seth and Georgia are planning to leave the country within the next 2 weeks. If we don't act soon, they'll disappear with millions in stolen money, and dozens of families will continue to face threats and extortion. I thought about Henderson's daughter receiving threatening phone calls at college, about the 8-year-old girl whose tires were slashed, about all the families I didn't know who were living in fear because of my husband's criminal enterprise. I picked up the recording device. What do you need me to do? The recording device felt like a lead weight in my jacket pocket as I drove home from the FBI meeting. Agent Torres had programmed it to activate with a specific voice command. Remember our anniversary, words that Seth would find natural but that would signal the agent's monitoring from the surveillance van that I was about to attempt getting his confession. I had 48 hours to create the right opportunity. After that, the FBI would move forward with arrests based on existing evidence, but without Seth's admission to the threats and violence, some of the network's members might escape serious prosecution. That evening, Seth seemed unusually relaxed, almost celebratory. He'd brought home Chinese takeout from our favorite restaurant, and opened a bottle of wine that we'd been saving for a special occasion. What are we celebrating? I asked, trying to keep my voice light despite the surveillance equipment hidden on my body. The Riverside Development Project got final approval today, he said, raising his glass in a toast. 18 months of work, and it all came together perfectly. 18 months. The same timeline as his relationship with Georgia and the beginning of the corruption network. I forced myself to smile and clink glasses with him. That's wonderful news. Henderson must be thrilled. Seth's expression flickered almost imperceptibly. Henderson understands that success requires patience and cooperation. Not everyone has been as understanding. The opening I needed. What do you mean? Some business owners in this city have unrealistic expectations about how government works. They think they can get permits and approvals without making the necessary investments in the political process. Investments. Seth refilled his wine glass, settling back in his chair with the confidence of someone who believed he'd already won. Anna, you've been married to a politician for 3 years. You understand that everything runs on relationships and mutual benefit. Some people need encouragement to see the bigger picture. My heart was pounding, but I kept my expression neutral. What kind of encouragement? Nothing dramatic. A conversation about how difficult the permit process can be for uncooperative applicants. A reminder that city inspectors are very thorough when they want to be. Sometimes family members receive information about the potential consequences of poor business decisions. He was describing the threats so casually, as if intimidating families was just another campaign strategy. I thought about the recording device, hoping it was capturing every word. That seems harsh, I said carefully. Seth leaned forward, his eyes intense. Anna, we're building something revolutionary here. A system where government actually works efficiently, where projects get approved quickly, where everyone benefits. but you can't make an omelet without breaking some eggs. Some eggs? People who refuse to participate constructively, like that restaurant owner who thought he could ignore our suggestions about community investment. His tire problem was unfortunate, but sometimes object lessons are necessary. There it was. Seth had just admitted to ordering the tire slashing that had terrified an 8-year-old girl. I felt sick, but I needed more. How many people have needed these object lessons? Seth smiled, apparently mistaking my horror for admiration. Fewer than you might think. Word travels fast in the business community. Once people understand that cooperation brings benefits and resistance brings complications, most make the smart choice. He pulled out his secret phone, the one I'd discovered in his desk. Georgia's been brilliant at expanding the model. We've got interest from politicians in 4 other cities who want to implement similar systems. Georgia Hansen, I said, as if the name was just coming to me. You'd like her, Seth said, scrolling through messages. She's sharp, ambitious, understands that real change requires working outside traditional constraints. She's helped me see possibilities I never imagined. It sounds like you two work closely together. Seth's hand paused on his phone. For a moment, I thought I'd pushed too far, revealed too much knowledge. But then he smiled, a different kind of smile than I'd seen before, intimate in a way that made my stomach churn. Georgia understands me in ways that, well, in ways that traditional political wives sometimes can't. The casual cruelty of the statement hit me like a slap. He wasn't just confessing to criminal activity, he was explaining why I deserved to be betrayed. I see, I managed. Don't look hurt, Anna. This isn't personal. You've been the perfect political wife, but this level of operation requires partnerships based on shared vision, not just shared history. Seth stood up, pacing to the window. Georgia and I are planning something much bigger than Springfield. Municipal corruption networks in a dozen cities, all coordinated, all profitable. We're talking about transforming how local government operates across the entire region, and if people don't cooperate, then they face the consequences of their poor judgment. Anna, we've helped the Thornton family understand that their construction business depends on city contracts. We've educated several restaurant owners about health inspection procedures. We've provided guidance to developers about environmental compliance. Each euphemism was a confession to criminal threats. I had enough evidence to destroy him, but he wasn't finished. The beauty of the system is scalability. Once you control municipal services in multiple cities, you can coordinate regional projects, share information about uncooperative businesses, provide comprehensive solutions for clients who understand the value of cooperation. Seth was describing a criminal empire, and he was proud of it. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Time to wrap up. We're moving in 1 hour. The FBI was ready. They had everything they needed. All I had to do was survive the next 60 minutes without revealing what I'd been doing. The text message felt like a countdown timer in my pocket. 1 hour until the FBI moved in. 1 hour to maintain the facade that had become my survival strategy. 1 hour before my entire world exploded. Seth was still pacing by the window, energized by his own confessions in a way that made my skin crawl. He'd just described a criminal empire to me, as if he were discussing vacation plans, completely confident in my complicity or ignorance. You know what the best part is, he continued, turning back toward me with that same predatory smile. The system is self-perpetuating. Once businesses understand the benefits of cooperation, they start recruiting other businesses. Fear is a powerful motivator, but greed is even better. I nodded, forcing myself to look interested while my mind raced. The recording device had captured everything: the threats, the expansion plans, the casual admission of crimes spanning multiple cities. but I still had to get through the next hour without arousing suspicion. It sounds incredibly complex to coordinate, I said, hoping to keep him talking while the FBI prepared their arrests. That's Georgia's genius. She developed a communication system that keeps everything compartmentalized. Each city thinks they're running an independent operation, but they're all connected through shell companies and encrypted messaging. Seth sat back down, pulling out his phone. Want to see how elegant it is? Before I could respond, he was showing me an app I'd never seen before, an encrypted messaging platform that looked like a normal calendar application, but clearly served a different purpose. Each event is actually a code for different types of operations. Lunch meetings are payoff collections. Site visits are intimidation jobs. Conference calls are coordination between cities. Seth scrolled through dozens of entries, each one representing crimes I was helping to document. Georgia says we're handling over 50 active situations across 4 cities, 50 families living under threat, 50 businesses being extorted. The scope was even worse than the FBI had suspected. My phone buzzed again. Another text. 45 minutes. Stay calm. Anna. Are you okay? You look pale, Seth said, suddenly focused on me with uncomfortable intensity. Just processing everything you're telling me. It's a lot to take in. I know it's overwhelming, but I wanted you to understand what we're building together. Your role as mayor's wife will be crucial to the operation's credibility. My role. He wasn't just confessing his crimes, he was recruiting me to participate in them. What kind of role? Public relations, essentially, attending charity events with business leaders who participate in our system, being photographed with their families at community functions, showing that the mayor's household stands behind Springfield's cooperative business community. He wanted me to be a prop in his criminal enterprise, to smile for cameras with families he was extorting, to legitimize his corruption with my presence at social events. And if I'm not comfortable with that, I asked, testing how much freedom I actually had. Seth's expression hardened slightly. Anna, you're my wife. Your comfort level isn't really the primary consideration here. This is about building something bigger than personal preferences. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. I wasn't a partner in this conversation. I was another asset to be managed. Another text. 30 minutes. FBI is in position. I need some water, I said, standing carefully to avoid dislodging the recording equipment. All this wine is making me dizzy. In the kitchen, I allowed myself 30 seconds of controlled panic. My hands shook as I filled a glass with water, but I forced myself to breathe slowly. 30 minutes. I just had to maintain this performance for 30 more minutes. When I returned to the living room, Seth was on his phone, speaking in the low, urgent tone I'd learned to associate with criminal business. No, tomorrow is too late, he was saying. If Henderson is getting cold feet, we need to remind him what's at stake tonight. Henderson, the man who'd risked everything to warn me about Seth's operation. I don't care if his daughter is visiting from college, Seth continued. Sometimes family considerations provide the best motivation for cooperation. The casual cruelty of the statement made me dizzy. Seth was ordering a threat against Henderson's daughter, while I sat 10 feet away, recording every word. Handle it the same way we handled the Thornton situation. Nothing too dramatic, just enough to clarify the importance of maintaining agreements. I gripped my water glass to keep my hands from shaking. The Thornton situation, another family terrorized to serve Seth's ambitions. Good, and make sure Georgia knows we're accelerating the timeline for the other cities. I want those operations active within 2 weeks. 2 weeks. If the FBI hadn't intervened tonight, Seth's criminal network would have expanded exponentially. He ended the call and turned back to me with a smile that might have fooled me 3 days ago. Now it looked like the practiced expression of a sociopath. Sorry about that. Business doesn't always respect dinner hours. Everything okay? just some housekeeping. A few business owners need gentle reminders about their commitments to community development. 20 minutes until the arrests. 20 minutes to maintain the illusion that I was still the naive political wife who didn't understand what her husband really did for a living. My phone buzzed one final time. 15 minutes. Agents surrounding the house. When we come in, get on the floor immediately. Seth noticed me checking my phone. Popular evening for text messages, he observed. Hannah, I lied smoothly. She's having relationship problems. Hannah Lynch. Something sharp entered Seth's voice. You've been talking to her a lot lately. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Seth was studying me with the same calculating expression I'd seen him use on political opponents. She's my oldest friend, I said, carefully. She's also a police detective, Seth replied. And Anna, I'm starting to wonder exactly what kind of advice you've been giving each other. The air in our living room became electric with unspoken accusations. Seth's eyes had turned cold, calculating, and I realized with growing terror that my husband, the man who'd just casually ordered threats against a college student, was beginning to suspect exactly what I'd been doing. Hannah's just a friend, I repeated, but my voice sounded hollow even to me. Seth set down his wine glass with deliberate precision. Anna, in my line of work, I've learned to recognize when people aren't being entirely honest with me. You've been asking a lot of questions lately, about Georgia, about my meetings, about people I work with. My heart hammered against my ribs. How long did I have before the FBI moved in? 10 minutes? 5? I'm your wife. I'm naturally curious about your work. Are you? Seth stood up, beginning to pace again, but this time his movement felt predatory rather than excited. Because I'm remembering some interesting coincidences. Henderson seemed unusually nervous at our last meeting, kept looking around like he expected someone to be watching. And now you're suddenly best friends with a police detective. Think, Anna, keep him talking. Don't let him realize how much you know. Seth, you're being paranoid. Hannah and I have been friends since college. Have you? He pulled out his phone, not the secret one, but his regular device. Because I had someone check your phone records. You and Hannah had exactly 3 conversations in the 6 months before the election. But in the past 2 weeks, you've talked or texted 47 times. My blood turned to ice. Seth had been monitoring my communications. How much did he know? She's been supportive during the campaign stress. Cut the bullshit, Anna. His voice had turned sharp, dangerous. I know you've been somewhere you weren't supposed to be. I know you've been talking to people you weren't supposed to talk to. The question is, how much damage have you done? The mask had finally slipped completely. This wasn't my husband anymore. This was the criminal who'd built an empire on fear and intimidation, and he was turning that machinery on me. I don't know what you're talking about. Seth laughed, but there was no humor in it. You know what's funny? I actually believed you were too naive to be a threat. Sweet little Anna, content to be the perfect political wife, never asking difficult questions. But you've been playing a different game entirely, haven't you? He moved closer, and I could smell the wine on his breath, see the rage building behind his eyes. Who have you been talking to, Anna? What have you told them? Nothing. I haven't told anyone anything because there's nothing to tell. The lie felt transparent, desperate. Seth was studying me like a predator evaluating wounded prey. Show me your phone, he demanded.
What?
Your phone. If you've got nothing to hide, show me your phone right now. My phone contained encrypted communication apps the FBI had installed, contact information for Simon Lynch, and text messages about surveillance times and evidence collection. Handing it over would be signing my death warrant. This is ridiculous, Seth. You're acting paranoid. He moved faster than I expected, grabbing my wrist with enough force to leave bruises. "Show me the fucking phone, Anna." The profanity shocked me more than the physical aggression. In 3 years of marriage, I'd never heard Seth use that tone, never seen that expression on his face. This was the man who terrorized families, who ordered break-ins and threats, who was planning to expand his criminal empire to a dozen cities. "You're hurting me," I said, trying to pull away. "I'm about to hurt you a lot more if you don't start telling the truth." His grip tightened. "Anna, do you have any idea what's at stake here? What you're risking by playing games you don't understand?" Through the window, I caught a glimpse of movement in the darkness. Shadows that might have been agents positioning themselves around our house. "How much time was left?" "I need you to think very carefully about your next words," Seth continued, his voice dropping to a whisper that was somehow more terrifying than shouting. "Because if you've betrayed me, if you've endangered what we've built, there will be consequences you can't imagine." "Are you threatening me?" "I'm explaining reality. Anna, you know what happened to people who crossed Georgia's operation in Chicago. Accidents happen. Houses catch fire. People have heart attacks brought on by stress." Heart attacks. The fake medical records he'd created, the massive life insurance policy. He wasn't just threatening me, he was explaining how he planned to kill me. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Seth's eyes dropped to the sound immediately. "Give it to me," he demanded. "Now." I could hear sirens in the distance, faint but growing louder. The FBI was coming, but were they close enough? Seth noticed my expression change, saw me listening to something he couldn't yet hear. "What is that?" His voice was deadly quiet. The sirens were getting louder, multiple vehicles converging on our quiet suburban street. Seth's face went white as understanding dawned. "You fucking bitch, what have you done?" He lunged for me just as the front door exploded inward with a crash that shook the entire house. FBI. Everybody on the ground now. The living room filled with armed agents, their tactical gear and weapons creating a scene from my worst nightmares. Red laser dots danced across the walls as officers positioned themselves throughout the house. "Anna Milliken, get on the floor immediately." Agent Torres' his voice cut through the chaos. I dropped down, hands over my head, while Seth stood frozen in the center of the room, his expression cycling through rage, disbelief, and finally, cold calculation. "Seth Milliken, you're under arrest for conspiracy, money laundering, extortion, and racketeering," Agent Torres announced as 2 officers moved to restrain him. Even in handcuffs, Seth's eyes never left mine. The look he gave me promised that this wasn't over, that somehow, someway, he would make me pay for destroying everything he'd built. But as the agents helped me to my feet and began processing the scene, I felt something I hadn't experienced in weeks: relief. The recording device in my pocket had captured everything. The criminal empire was about to collapse, and I was finally safe. The FBI raid unfolded like a carefully choreographed operation that had been planned for weeks. As agents secured Seth and began reading him his rights, I could hear similar operations happening throughout the city, sirens wailing, radios crackling with coordination between teams hitting multiple locations simultaneously. "Anna, are you injured?" Agent Torres asked, helping me to the couch while other agents processed the scene. "No, just shaken," I replied, though my wrist was already showing bruises from Seth's grip. Seth hadn't spoken since his arrest, but his eyes tracked every movement in the room with predatory focus. Even in handcuffs, he radiated the dangerous energy of someone calculating his next move. "We're also executing warrants on the storage facility, Georgia Hansen's residence, and 14 other locations," Agent Torres explained. This is the largest municipal corruption bust in the region's history. Through our front window, I could see news vans already arriving, their bright lights turning our quiet street into a media circus. The story would be everywhere by morning. Mayor-elect arrested in federal corruption probe. Mrs. Milliken, we need to transport you to a safe location, Agent Martinez said. The investigation isn't over, and some of Seth's associates are still at large. What about Georgia Hanson, arrested 20 minutes ago at the Grand Regency Hotel? She was in the middle of destroying financial records when our team arrived. Seth's head snapped up at this news, the first crack in his stoic facade. Without Georgia's expertise in covering their tracks, the entire network was vulnerable. We also arrested Marcus Henderson, Agent Torres continued. Not as a conspirator, but for his own protection. He's agreed to testify in exchange for immunity, but some of the people your husband was working with don't distinguish between willing and unwilling participants. The magnitude of what was happening began to sink in. This wasn't just about Seth and Georgia, it was about dismantling a criminal network that spanned multiple cities and involved dozens of people. How many arrests total? I asked. 18 so far, with more expected as we process the evidence from tonight's raids. Agent Martinez showed me his tablet, displaying a map of Springfield with red dots marking arrest locations. City council members, business owners, county officials. Your husband built quite an operation. Seth finally spoke, his voice cold and controlled. Anna, you have no idea what you've done. The people we were working with don't forget betrayals. They don't forgive witnesses. Mr. Milliken, anything you say can and will be used against you, Agent Torres warned. But Seth continued, staring directly at me. You think this ends with arrests? You think federal agents can protect you from everyone we've dealt with? Anna, you've signed your own death warrant. That's enough, Agent Torres said sharply, signaling for Seth to be removed from the house. As they led him away, Seth called back over his shoulder, "Remember our anniversary, Anna. Remember what you promised me that day." The phrase hit me like ice water. Remember our anniversary, the voice command for the recording device. Had he figured out what I'd been doing? How long had he known? Agent Torres noticed my reaction. What did he mean by that? It was the activation phrase for the recording device. But if he knew, I couldn't finish the thought. If he knew, then he was confessing intentionally. Agent Martinez concluded grimly, which means tonight wasn't about getting caught, it was about something else entirely. Outside, Seth was being loaded into an FBI vehicle when his phone rang, the secret phone I'd discovered in his desk. Agent Torres answered it, putting the call on speaker. Seth, the voice was Georgia Hanson, but she sounded panicked, desperate. Seth, they got me, they have everything, the files, the bank records, the photographs. But I didn't tell them about Phase 3, I kept that information to myself. Phase 3. Another layer of the criminal enterprise that we hadn't uncovered. Who is this? Agent Torres asked. The line went dead immediately. What's Phase 3? I asked, but the grim expressions on the agents' faces suggested they were asking themselves the same question. As we prepared to leave the house that had been my home for 3 years, I realized that tonight's arrests might not be the end of the nightmare, they might just be the beginning of something even worse. The criminal network Seth and Georgia had built was larger and more dangerous than anyone had suspected. And somewhere in the darkness, Phase 3 was still operational. The FBI safe house was a nondescript ranch home in a suburb 30 miles from Springfield, the kind of place that blended invisibly into middle-class anonymity. As Agent Torres led me through the front door, I realized I was crossing another threshold I could never uncross, from target of an investigation to protected witness in a federal case. "You'll be staying here until we can arrange more permanent protection," she explained, showing me to a small bedroom that felt like a hotel room designed by bureaucrats. "We have agents posted outside 24/7, and the location is classified." I sat on the edge of the bed, still wearing the same clothes I'd put on that morning when I was still pretending to be Seth's wife. Now I was a woman whose husband had threatened to kill her while FBI agents recorded every word. "What happens now?" I asked. Agent Martinez joined us, carrying a laptop and several thick folders. "Now we process the evidence from tonight's raids and prepare for what's likely to be one of the largest corruption trials in federal court history." He opened the laptop, showing me arrest photos from across the city, faces I recognized from campaign events and political fundraisers, all now federal defendants. 18 arrests tonight, but we expect that number to double as we analyze the financial records Georgia was trying to destroy. "What about Phase 3? The agents exchanged glances. "We're not sure yet. The financial records show large sums of money being transferred to accounts in other states, but the purpose isn't clear. It could be expansion funding for new cities, or it could be something else entirely." Agent Torres pulled out a recording device similar to the one I'd worn. "Anna, we need to debrief you on everything you observed tonight. Seth's confession was comprehensive, but we need details about names, locations, and specific threats." For the next 3 hours, I relived every moment of the evening: Seth's casual admissions of criminal activity, his descriptions of the intimidation tactics, his proud explanations of how the network operated. Each detail I provided helped the agents understand the scope of what they'd uncovered. "The most concerning element is his confidence," Agent Martinez noted. "Even when he realized you'd been recording him, he didn't seem particularly worried about the consequences." "What does that mean?" "It could mean he has political connections we haven't identified yet. People who might be able to influence the prosecution or provide protection in prison." Agent Torres looked troubled. "Or it could mean he has contingency plans we haven't discovered." My phone, which had been confiscated and analyzed, was returned with several missed calls from numbers I didn't recognize. "Who's been calling?" "Reporters mostly. The story broke an hour ago, and every news outlet in the region wants an exclusive interview with the mayor-elect's wife." Agent Torres showed me news headlines scrolling across her tablet. "Springfield mayor-elect arrested in corruption probe. Municipal bribery network spans 4 cities. Political wife helps FBI expose criminal enterprise." The last headline made my stomach clench. If my cooperation was already public knowledge, then Seth's associates would know I was the key witness against their operation. "Are they saying I was working with you from the beginning?" "Some outlets are speculating about that, yes. Which is why witness protection isn't optional anymore. It's essential for your survival." Agent Martinez received a call that made his expression darken. When he hung up, he looked directly at me. "Anna, we just got word that Marcus Henderson's daughter was approached at college by someone claiming to be a federal agent. They told her she needed to come with them for her own protection." "Was it really an agent?" "No. Campus security found her phone in a parking lot with a text message. 'Tell your father to reconsider his testimony.'" The room went silent as the implications sank in. The criminal network was still operational, still threatening families, even with their leadership in federal custody. Phase 3 isn't expansion into new cities, I realized aloud. It's witness elimination. Agent Torres nodded grimly. "Which means everyone who cooperated with our investigation is now a target, including me." Outside the safe house windows, darkness pressed against the glass like a living thing. Somewhere in that darkness, people who'd built their fortunes on fear and violence were planning their next moves. And I was the witness who could destroy them all. 6 months later, I stood in a federal courthouse in Chicago, my hand raised as I swore to tell the truth in the trial that had captivated the entire region. The woman taking the oath, bore little resemblance to the naive political wife who had answered a mysterious phone call at a victory party. My dark hair was now blonde, cut shorter than I'd worn it since college. The FBI had given me a new identity, but some changes ran deeper than appearance. "State your name for the record," the prosecutor requested. "Anna Catherine Hansen," I replied, using the surname I'd legally adopted, a final irony that I now shared George's last name, though we'd never been more opposed. The courtroom was packed with reporters, federal agents and family members of the defendants. In the first row sat Marcus Henderson, who'd testified earlier about the threats against his daughter. His cooperation had cost him his business, but his daughter was safe, hidden in the same witness protection program that had become my new reality. Seth sat at the defendant's table in an orange jumpsuit, flanked by expensive lawyers his family had hired. He'd lost weight during his months in federal custody, but his eyes still held that calculating coldness I'd learned to fear. When our gazes met, he showed no recognition of the woman he'd once promised to love and honor. "Mrs. Hansen, can you describe your relationship to the defendant Seth Milliken?" "He was my husband for 3 years. I believed I knew him completely." I paused, letting the weight of that admission settle. I was wrong. Over the next 4 hours I testified about everything I'd witnessed and recorded. The jury listened with growing horror as I described the network of corruption, the threats against families, the casual planning of violence. When I played the recording of Seth threatening Henderson's daughter, several jurors visibly recoiled. The defense attorney tried to paint me as a vengeful ex-wife, seeking revenge, but the evidence was overwhelming. Bank records, recordings, photographs, everything Simon Lynch and the FBI had helped me gather, painted an undeniable picture of systematic criminal enterprise. "Mrs. Hansen, do you regret your decision to cooperate with federal investigators?" I looked directly at Seth as I answered. "I regret that it took me so long to see the truth. But I don't regret stopping people who terrorized innocent families for profit." The trial lasted 3 weeks. Seth received 25 years in federal prison. Georgia Hansen, who'd cooperated in exchange for a reduced sentence, received 15 years. 18 other defendants received sentences ranging from 5 to 20 years. But the victory felt hollow as I walked out of the courthouse using a name that wasn't really mine, heading to an apartment in a city where no one knew my history. The woman who'd been Anna Milliken, teacher, wife, community volunteer, had died the night FBI agents crashed through my front door. The woman who survived was stronger, wiser, and completely alone. Yet as I watched the news report about the verdicts, seeing families like the Hendersons finally free from fear, I knew the sacrifice had been worth it. Some things matter more than personal happiness. Justice was one of them. 2 years after the trial, I was teaching 4th grade at Lincoln Elementary in Portland, Oregon, under the name Anna Catherine Hansen. The witness protection program had given me a new life, complete with fabricated employment history and college transcripts. To my students and colleagues, I was simply Miss Hansen, a dedicated teacher who'd moved from the Midwest for a fresh start. The truth was more complicated. Every morning, I checked the secure email account the FBI maintained for protected witnesses. Updates on appeals, parole hearings, and intelligence about associates of the Springfield network who might still pose threats. Seth's lawyers had filed numerous appeals, all unsuccessful. Georgia Hansen had been released early for good behavior and cooperation, but surveillance indicated she'd moved to Mexico and was living quietly under her real name. Marcus Henderson had also relocated through witness protection. We exchanged holiday cards, 2 survivors of the same nightmare, but we'd never met again in person. His daughter had graduated college and was working as a social worker, helping other families navigate trauma. The life I'd built in Portland was peaceful in ways I'd never experienced during my marriage. My small apartment overlooked a park where children played without fear. My students trusted me completely, unaware that their teacher had helped dismantle a criminal empire. The relationships I'd formed with colleagues were based on authenticity rather than political calculation. But late at night, when rain drummed against my windows and the city settled into quietude, I sometimes wondered about the woman I might have been if I'd never answered that phone call. Would I still be in Springfield, hosting political fundraisers and smiling for cameras? Would I have children who called Seth daddy, without knowing what he'd done to other families? The speculation never lasted long. That version of Anna Milliken had been living a lie, married to a man who viewed her as a convenient prop in his criminal enterprise. The woman I'd become, scarred but authentic, was infinitely preferable to the naive wife who'd trusted completely and seen nothing. On a Tuesday evening in March, exactly 3 years after the night that changed everything, my secure phone rang. Agent Torres, still checking in periodically as required by the protection program. Anna, I have news. Seth Milliken was found dead in his cell this morning. Apparent suicide. I set down the papers I'd been grading, processing information that should have felt momentous but somehow didn't. How? Improvised news from bedsheets. He left a note, but it was mostly rambling about political persecution and betrayal. Nothing that threatened you or other witnesses. Seth was gone. The man who'd promised to love me then threatened to kill me had finally removed himself from the equation entirely. How do you feel about this? Agent Torres asked gently. I walked to my apartment window, looking out at the park where children would play tomorrow without knowing that one more threat to their world had been eliminated. I feel nothing, I said honestly. He stopped being my husband the moment I discovered what he really was. This just makes it official. After ending the call, I returned to grading papers, spelling tests from 9-year-olds who still believed the world was fundamentally good. Their innocent mistakes and earnest efforts reminded me why some battles were worth fighting, even when victory required losing everything you thought you wanted. The next morning brought spring sunshine and a classroom full of students eager to learn about fractions. As I helped them understand how to divide whole numbers into equal parts, I realized the metaphor was appropriate for my own life. The woman I'd been had to be divided, broken down into component parts. Some pieces, the naive trust, the willingness to ignore obvious warning signs, had been discarded permanently. Other parts, the strength to do what was right regardless of personal cost, the ability to start over when everything familiar was gone, had been refined and strengthened. Standing at the front of my classroom, helping children understand mathematical concepts that would serve them throughout their lives, I felt something I'd never experienced during my marriage to Springfield's rising political star: complete authenticity. My name was Anna Catherine Hansen. I was a teacher, a survivor, and a woman who'd chosen justice over comfort when the choice mattered most. The mysterious phone calls that had shattered my old life had ultimately led me to a better one. And for the first time in years, that felt like enough. During lunch break, I received an unexpected email from Hannah Lynch. We'd maintained sporadic contact through secure channels, and her message contained news that made me smile for the first time in weeks. Thought you'd want to know, Springfield elected its first female mayor yesterday. Maria Santos, a former social worker who ran on a platform of transparency and community accountability. She mentioned in her victory speech that sometimes it takes ordinary citizens standing up to corruption to remind politicians who they really serve. I thought of you when she said that. Attached was a photo from the victory celebration. Maria Santos looked nothing like the politicians who'd surrounded Seth, no calculated charm or predatory confidence. She looked like someone who'd entered politics to solve problems rather than create them. Springfield was healing. The corruption network Seth and Georgia had built was truly finished. And somewhere in Portland, A teacher named Anna Hansen was helping fourth graders understand that even when things seem impossible, patient work and honest effort eventually yield results. It wasn't the life I'd planned, but it was a life I'd chosen, and that made all the difference. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.